The February wind howled through the streets of Mayfair, rattling the elegant windows of the Wyndham townhouse as Ada stood before her looking-glass, studying the reflection that stared back at her with quiet resignation. 32 years had etched themselves across her features, not harshly, but with an unmistakable presence that marked her as past the bloom of youth that society so desperately prized. Her dark blonde hair, pinned in a simple arrangement, caught the afternoon light filtering through the curtains. Her grey eyes, once bright with hope, now held a weary acceptance of her place in the world. She smoothed the fabric of her modest day dress. A soft lavender that her sister Philippa had once commented made her look appropriately subdued for a woman of her circumstances. "Ada, do stop dawdling." Philippa's voice carried up the stairs with the imperious tone of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "The carriage is waiting, and I refuse to be late to Lady Hartwell's dinner. Caroline and Rebecca are already dressed and presentable, unlike some people." Ada closed her eyes briefly, summoning the patience that had become her constant companion over the past 12 years. 12 years since her one and only season had ended without a single proposal. 12 years of watching younger women, including her own nieces, take center stage while she faded into the background of drawing rooms and ballrooms. She descended the stairs to find her sister waiting in the entrance hall, a vision of elegant perfection at 36. Philippa had somehow managed to retain the porcelain beauty that had secured her an advantageous match with Lord Edmund Hartley 15 years prior. Her auburn hair gleamed beneath a fashionable bonnet, and her emerald silk gown spoke of wealth and impeccable taste. Beside her stood Rebecca and Caroline, 18 and 17 respectively, dressed in white and pale pink, the colors of youth and possibility. They exchanged knowing glances as Ada approached, their lips curving in barely suppressed smirks. "Finally," Rebecca murmured to her sister, though loud enough for Ada to hear. "I was beginning to think Aunt Ada had forgotten how to prepare herself for society, though I suppose when one has no prospects to impress, the effort seems rather pointless." Caroline giggled behind her gloved hand. "Rebecca, hush. Though truly, Aunt, that shade does nothing for your complexion. Perhaps something darker? It might help disguise the years." "Girls," Philippa said, though her tone carried more amusement than reproof, "your aunt does her best with what nature has provided. Not everyone can be blessed with youth and beauty." She turned to Ada with a critical eye. "Though truly, Ada, could you not have chosen something more fashionable? Lady Hartwell's gatherings are always attended by the finest members of society." "I find this perfectly suitable," Ada replied quietly, gathering her pelisse and reticule. "I am not attending to attract attention, merely to fulfill a social obligation." "How fortunate," Philippa said, sweeping toward the door, "since attention is something you're unlikely to receive in any case. Come along. Edmund is meeting us there directly from his club, and I will not have him wondering what has delayed us." The carriage ride to Lady Hartwell's residence on Berkeley Square was mercifully brief, though the close quarters allowed Philippa ample opportunity to detail the various eligible gentlemen who would be in attendance, all for the benefit of Rebecca and Caroline, naturally. "Lord Whitmore will certainly be there," Philippa said, adjusting her daughter's curls with maternal precision. "He's been quite attentive to you, Rebecca, at the last 3 gatherings. A baron with considerable holdings in Kent. You could do far worse." "Mamma, he's nearly 40, Rebecca protested. "And you are 18, with several seasons ahead of you," Philippa replied smoothly. "One must be practical about these matters. Youth fades, beauty diminishes, and opportunities narrow with each passing year." Her eyes flickered meaningfully toward Ada. "It is a lesson your aunt learned far too late, I fear." Ada turned her face toward the window, watching the grand houses of Mayfair pass by in the growing dusk. She had long since ceased arguing with Philippa's casual cruelties. What purpose would it serve? Her sister spoke only the truth that society whispered behind fans and over tea tables. Ada Wyndham, the Earl's younger daughter, had failed at the one task assigned to women of her station, securing a suitable marriage. It hadn't been for lack of trying in those early years. Her first season at the age of 20 had been filled with such hope. She had been pretty enough, well-dowered and properly educated, but pretty enough had not been enough. Other girls had been prettier, more vivacious, more skilled at the delicate art of flirtation that seemed to come so naturally to them and so awkwardly to her. By her second season, the whispers had begun. By her third, the invitations had dwindled. By the time she turned 25, she had become what every unmarried woman feared: a cautionary tale, a spinster, an object of pity and mild contempt. The carriage drew to a halt before Lady Hartwell's impressive residence, its windows blazing with light and promise. Footmen rushed forward to assist them from the carriage, and Ada followed her sister and nieces up the steps, already preparing herself for an evening of invisibility. Lady Hartwell's drawing room was a masterpiece of elegant entertaining. Crystal chandeliers cast sparkling light across walls adorned with fine artwork, while arrangements of hothouse flowers perfumed the air despite the winter chill outside. The guests, already assembled in their finest evening attire, represented the cream of London society. Ada accepted a glass of lemonade from a passing servant and found her customary position near one of the tall windows, where she could observe without being observed. This had become her role at such gatherings: the quiet presence in the corner, the unmarried aunt who could be relied upon to make appropriate conversation with elderly dowagers and maiden aunts, the woman who posed no threat and attracted no notice. She watched Philippa sweep into the room with practiced grace, Lord Edmund materializing at her side within moments. They made a handsome couple, Ada acknowledged, with the distant objectivity of long familiarity. Edmund, tall and distinguished with silver threading his dark hair, looked every inch the successful nobleman. Philippa, radiant and confident, commanded attention effortlessly. Rebecca and Caroline were quickly surrounded by young people their own age, laughter and flirtation flowing as naturally as wine. Ada observed their easy confidence, so different from her own stilted attempts at social grace during her own brief moment in society's spotlight. "Lady Ada," a familiar voice said beside her, and Ada turned to find Lady Pemberton, a woman of considerable years and even more considerable opinions, settling into the chair beside her. "Still haunting the edges of ballrooms, I see. Have you given up entirely on matrimony, or do you still harbour foolish hopes?" "I harbour only the hope of a pleasant evening, Lady Pemberton," Ada replied, with the polite smile she had perfected over years of such conversations. "Sensible girl," the elderly woman said, though at 32 Ada hardly qualified as a girl. "Better to accept one's lot than to continue grasping at what has clearly passed you by. Your sister's daughters are lovely creatures. One can only hope they prove more successful in securing suitable matches than you did." Before Ada could formulate a response, a subtle shift in the room's energy drew her attention. Conversations quieted momentarily, and heads turned toward the entrance where Lady Hartwell was greeting a late arrival with evident pleasure. "The Duke of Thornbury," someone whispered nearby. "I heard he'd returned to London after years managing his northern estates." Ada's view was partially obscured by other guests, but she caught glimpses of a tall figure with dark hair, impeccably dressed in evening clothes that spoke of wealth and excellent tailoring. The Duke moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to deference, his presence commanding attention without apparent effort. "Quite the catch," Lady Pemberton observed, following Ada's gaze. "Wealthy, titled and still unmarried at 34. Every ambitious mama in London will be sharpening her claws. Not that it concerns you, of course." "Of course," Ada echoed softly, already turning her attention away. Men like the Duke of Thornbury existed in a sphere far removed from her own limited orbit. Even in her youth, such elevated matches had been beyond her reach. Now, they were simply irrelevant to her existence. The dinner bell rang, and guests began arranging themselves according to the careful placement Lady Hartwell had orchestrated. Ada found herself seated between an elderly clergyman who was quite deaf and a gentleman scholar who spent the entire first course discussing ancient Greek pottery, with such enthusiasm that he required no responses beyond occasional nods. It was, Ada reflected as she delicately ate her soup, exactly the sort of evening she had come to expect, pleasant enough in its way, requiring little of her beyond basic courtesy, and utterly forgettable. She would return home, help Philippa dissect the evening's events, particularly Rebecca and Caroline's social triumphs, and retire to her small room where she might read until sleep claimed her. This was her life. This was all her life would ever be. After dinner, as the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room while the gentlemen remained for port and cigars, Ada found herself increasingly restless. The feminine chatter about fashion, marriages and scandal felt particularly stifling tonight. Perhaps it was the cold February evening, or perhaps it was simply the accumulated weight of 12 years of such evenings. But she found herself slipping away from the gathering. Lady Hartwell's residence boasted a beautiful conservatory adjacent to the main drawing room, a glass-enclosed space filled with exotic plants that flourished despite the winter cold beyond the windows. Ada had discovered it during a previous visit and found its quiet greenery a welcome respite from the demands of social performance. She entered the conservatory, breathing in the earthy scent of soil and growing things. Moonlight filtered through the glass panels overhead, casting silver shadows across the stone floor. For a moment, she simply stood there, allowing the solitude to wash over her like a blessing. A small sound, a soft chirping mixed with distress, drew her attention to the far corner of the conservatory. There, beneath one of the windows, a small bird lay on its side, one wing extended at an awkward angle. It must have flown against the glass and injured itself in the collision. Without hesitation, Ada knelt beside the creature, heedless of her silk gown against the stone floor. She had always felt an affinity for wounded things, for creatures that others overlooked or dismissed as insignificant. "There now," she whispered, carefully scooping the bird into her cupped hands. "Let me see what's happened to you." The bird, a sparrow, lay trembling in her palms. Its bright black eyes looked up at her with what seemed like understanding. Ada gently examined the injured wing, her touch feather-light as she assessed the damage. "Not broken, I think," she murmured, stroking the soft feathers with one finger. "Just badly bruised. You flew too hard against something that appeared to be open sky, didn't you? The glass deceived you into thinking you could pass through." The bird chirped softly, and Ada smiled. A genuine smile, unguarded and warm, so different from the polite expressions she wore in society. "I understand that feeling," she told the small creature. "The world is full of barriers that appear invisible until you strike against them. Some of us learn to see them early. Others keep trying to fly through, hoping this time will be different." She continued her gentle ministrations, checking the bird's other wing, its tiny legs, speaking to it all the while in that same soft voice. "You'll heal," she assured it. "You'll fly again. Perhaps you'll remember to be more cautious next time, or perhaps you'll forget and try again. That's the nature of birds, I suppose, and people. We keep hoping for the impossible, even when wisdom tells us to accept what is." Benjamin Grey, Duke of Thornbury, had endured exactly 47 minutes of conversation about crop yields, parliamentary politics, and the current state of London's gaming establishments before his patience reached its limit. He had returned to London after 3 years managing his estates in Northumberland, hoping to find the capital less tedious than he remembered. He had been disappointed. The same conversations, the same superficial pleasantries, the same calculating glances from ambitious mothers with marriageable daughters, all of it struck him as profoundly pointless. At 34, he had successfully avoided the matrimonial trap through a combination of spending most of his time in the north and maintaining a reputation for being difficult to please. The truth was simpler. He had yet to meet a woman who seemed real to him, who spoke with genuine feeling rather than calculated flirtation, who possessed substance beneath the performance that society demanded of young ladies seeking advantageous matches. His friend Thomas Ashford, Viscount Ashford, had insisted he attend Lady Hartwell's dinner, promising interesting company and excellent wine. The wine had indeed been excellent. The company had proven as insipid as Benjamin had feared. Excusing himself from a discussion about the latest agricultural innovations, a topic that genuinely interested him, but which Lord Pemberton managed to make numbingly dull, Benjamin wandered away from the group of gentlemen clustered near the fireplace. Through the open doors of the drawing-room, he could hear feminine laughter and conversation. The ladies had withdrawn there after dinner, and no doubt his presence would be expected soon for cards or musical entertainment. Instead, he found himself drawn to a set of glass doors that appeared to lead to some sort of conservatory. Through the panes, he caught sight of greenery and the silver wash of moonlight. The promise of solitude, even brief, proved irresistible. He opened the door quietly and stepped into the cool, plant-scented air of the conservatory. The change from the overheated drawing-room was immediately refreshing. He took a deep breath, allowing the tension in his shoulders to ease slightly. Then he saw her. A woman knelt on the stone floor in the far corner of the conservatory, her evening gown pooling around her, her attention entirely focused on something cupped in her hands. Moonlight painted her profile in silver, the gentle slope of her nose, the curve of her cheek, the tender concentration in her expression as she bent over whatever she held. Benjamin froze, transfixed. She was speaking. He could see her lips moving, though he was too far away to hear the words. Her voice, when the faint sound of it reached him, was soft and melodious, with none of the affected tones he had heard from every other woman that evening. Whatever she held commanded her complete attention, and there was such genuine tenderness in every movement, such unself-conscious grace, that Benjamin found himself unable to look away. She stroked whatever small creature lay in her hands with infinite gentleness and smiled, a smile of pure, unguarded warmth that transformed her entire face. It was not the practiced smile of a woman performing for society, but the natural expression of someone who felt deeply and openly, who had forgotten to guard herself in this moment of solitary compassion. Benjamin counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. By the 7th second, something in his chest had shifted, like a door opening onto a room he hadn't known existed. By the 10th second, he knew with absolute certainty that he was looking at someone extraordinary, someone real in a world that increasingly felt like an elaborate theatrical production. By the 12th second, he knew he would move heaven and earth to discover who she was, to hear her speak, to earn the right to be the recipient of that unguarded smile. 12 seconds to fall completely, irrevocably under her spell. He must have made some small sound, a shifted footstep, an exhaled breath, because she suddenly looked up, her eyes meeting his across the length of the conservatory. Even in the dim light, he could see them widen in surprise, and something else. Embarrassment, fear of reproach for being found alone away from the gathering. "Forgive me," Benjamin said quickly, stepping forward with his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I did not mean to startle you. I needed some air and had no idea anyone else sought the same refuge." She rose gracefully to her feet, still cradling her hands carefully. "No, it is I who should apologize, Your Grace. I should not have left the gathering without informing Lady Hartwell." So she knew who he was. Benjamin found himself absurdly pleased that she had recognized him, then immediately questioned why it should matter. "I won't tell if you won't," he said with a slight smile. "What do you have there?" For a moment he thought she might demur, might offer some polite excuse and flee back to the safety of the drawing-room. Instead, she glanced down at her cupped hands, and that tender expression returned. "A sparrow," she said softly, moving closer and opening her hands slightly so he could see. "It flew against the window and injured its wing. The damage isn't severe, I believe, but it needs rest and warmth to recover." Benjamin approached, genuinely curious now, and looked down at the small bird nestled in her palms. Its bright eyes darted between them, but it seemed remarkably calm given the presence of two large humans. "You have a healing touch," he observed. "It trusts you." "Wounded creatures recognize kindness," she replied, then seemed to catch herself, as if realizing she had spoken more openly than society permitted. A faint flush colored her cheeks. "That is, I have always felt an affinity for birds. They are so often overlooked, yet they possess such beauty and resilience." "I find myself in complete agreement," Benjamin said, though he was no longer looking at the bird. He was studying her face, trying to understand why everything about her, the way she held herself, the thoughtfulness in her expression, the gentle strength in her hands, seemed to resonate with something deep within him. She was not conventionally beautiful in the way that society defined beauty. Her features were pleasant but unremarkable, her figure nicely proportioned, but not exceptionally so. She wore her hair in a simple style that suggested practicality rather than fashion. Her gown, while of good quality, was neither the height of style nor the pale colors that young women wore, and yet Benjamin found her utterly captivating. "I should return this little one to Lady Hartwell's housekeeper," she said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "If it can be kept warm and quiet tonight, it should recover sufficiently to be released tomorrow." "Allow me to escort you," Benjamin offered immediately. "It would be my honor." She hesitated, and he saw wariness enter her expression. "That is very kind, Your Grace, but unnecessary. I am quite capable of managing on my own. I have been doing so for many years." There was something in those last words, a weight, a resignation, that made Benjamin's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I have no doubt of your capability," he said gently, "but perhaps you might humor me. I find I am in no great hurry to return to a discussion of corn prices and parliamentary procedures." The corner of her mouth quirked upward just slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "When you put it that way, how can I refuse?" They walked together through the quiet corridors beyond the conservatory, their footsteps echoing softly on polished floors. The sounds of the party, laughter, conversation, the tinkling of piano keys, grew more distant as they sought out the servants' quarters. "You never told me your name," Benjamin said as they walked. She glanced at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Did I not? I apologize. I am Lady Ada Wyndham, daughter of the Earl of Wyndham." Wyndham. Benjamin searched his memory and recalled meeting the Earl briefly during his previous time in London. An older gentleman, somewhat pompous but harmless enough. He had a married daughter and another daughter. This one, presumably. "It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Lady Ada," he said, and meant it more sincerely than any social pleasantry he had uttered in weeks. They found the housekeeper in her small office, and Lady Ada explained the situation with the same gentle clarity she had used when speaking to the bird itself. The housekeeper, charmed despite herself, produced a small box lined with soft cloth and promised to keep the sparrow warm and quiet until morning. Lady Ada surrendered her small charge with visible reluctance, stroking its feathers one last time. "Fly carefully," she whispered to it. "The world has enough obstacles without adding our own recklessness to them." As they made their way back toward the gathering, Benjamin found himself searching for ways to prolong the conversation, to keep her in his company for just a few minutes longer. "Have you always had this affinity for birds, Lady Ada?" "Since childhood," she replied, and there was warmth in her voice now, the wariness beginning to fade. "My father's estate in Kent has extensive grounds, and I spent many hours in the gardens, observing the birds and other creatures. I found them easier to understand than people, I suppose, more honest in their nature." "Honest," Benjamin repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I can understand that. People wear so many masks in society. It becomes difficult to discern what is genuine and what is performance." She glanced at him, and for a moment their eyes met with perfect understanding. It was there again, that sense of connection, of recognition, as if they were two people who had been speaking different languages their entire lives and suddenly discovered they shared a mother tongue. "Your Grace," she said softly, and there was something almost like regret in her voice. "We should return to the party. Our absence will be noted and, well, it would not do for either of us to be the subject of speculation." "Would it be so terrible," Benjamin asked, "if people speculated about us?" She stopped walking, turning to face him fully in the dimly lit corridor. In the shadows, her expression was difficult to read, but he heard the sadness in her voice when she spoke. "Yes, Your Grace, it would be terrible, for me at least. You are the Duke of Thornbury, wealthy, titled, sought after by every ambitious family in London. I am—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I am a woman of 32 years, who has long since ceased to be of interest to society. Any speculation about us would only lead to my embarrassment and your inconvenience. Better to return to the gathering separately and allow this pleasant interlude to fade from memory." "And if I have no wish for it to fade?" Benjamin asked quietly. Lady Ada's expression was infinitely sad and infinitely wise. "Then I fear you have not yet understood the way of things, Your Grace. But you will. Society has a way of making such matters painfully clear." She curtsied, a gesture of perfect propriety, and slipped away before he could formulate a response. Benjamin watched her go, disappearing around the corner toward the drawing-room, and felt an inexplicable sense of loss. He stood alone in the corridor for a long moment, his mind replaying those 12 seconds in the conservatory, the tenderness in her face, the gentleness of her hands, the unguarded beauty of her smile. And he made a decision. Lady Ada Wyndham believed herself invisible, believed her time had passed, believed that men like him would never see women like her. She was wrong, and Benjamin Grey, Duke of Thornbury, intended to prove it to her. The morning after Lady Hartwell's dinner, Benjamin Gray sat in his study at Thornbury House on Park Lane, attempting to focus on the correspondence that had accumulated during his years in Northumberland. The early March sunlight streaming through the tall windows illuminated letters from his estate managers, invitations to various social functions, and requests for his attendance at parliamentary sessions. He read the same line in a report about timber yields 3 times before admitting defeat. His mind was elsewhere, specifically in Lady Hartwell's conservatory, replaying those 12 seconds when he had first glimpsed Ada Wyndham kneeling on the stone floor, tenderness incarnate as she cared for a wounded sparrow. And then their conversation afterward, her intelligence and perception evident in every word, her resignation to her place in society, heartbreaking in its quiet acceptance. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Enter," he called, grateful for the distraction. Thomas Ashford, Viscount Ashford, strolled in with the easy familiarity of a friendship that stretched back to their school days at Eton. Thomas was fair where Benjamin was dark, gregarious where Benjamin tended toward reserve, but they had understood each other from the start. 2 young men born to privilege, who nonetheless questioned the shallow waters in which they swam. "You left early last night," Thomas observed, helping himself to a glass of brandy from the sideboard despite the early hour. "I was beginning to think you'd escaped through a window rather than endure Lady Pemberton's interpretations of popular songs." "I did leave rather abruptly," Benjamin admitted. "Something came up that required my attention." Thomas settled into one of the leather chairs opposite Benjamin's desk, studying his friend with the shrewd perception that made him far more perceptive than his affable manner suggested. "Something or someone?" Benjamin set down the report he hadn't been reading anyway. "Tell me what you know about Lady Ada Wyndham." "Ada Wyndham?" Thomas's eyebrows rose toward his hairline. "Good heavens, Benjamin. Of all the women at Lady Hartwell's gathering, you've fixed your interest on her." "I asked what you know about her, not for your editorial commentary," Benjamin said mildly, but there was steel beneath the courtesy. Thomas had the grace to look somewhat abashed. "Very well. Ada Wyndham is the younger daughter of the Earl of Wyndham. Her elder sister, Philippa, married Lord Edmund Hartley, quite advantageously, as Hartley is both wealthy and influential. Philippa has 2 daughters, both out in society now. Ada herself is—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "She's 2 or 3 and 30, I believe. Never married. Had 1 season when she was 20 that didn't take. She's considered— well, she's a spinster, Benjamin. Pleasant enough, I suppose, but entirely without prospects." "She's 32, Benjamin said quietly, "and there is nothing whatsoever wrong with her." Thomas leaned forward, genuine concern evident in his expression. "Benjamin, I say this as your friend. Whatever fleeting interest you've developed, let it pass. Ada Wyndham exists on the absolute margins of society. She's tolerated at gatherings because of her father's title, but she's viewed as a cautionary tale, a woman who failed at the one task assigned to her sex. If you show her attention, you'll make her the subject of cruel speculation and yourself the object of mockery. Is that truly what you want?" "What I want," Benjamin said, his voice hardening, "is to become better acquainted with a woman I found remarkably compelling. If society chooses to speculate, that is society's failing, not mine." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You're serious about this?" "Entirely." "Then you should know what you're walking into." Thomas set down his brandy glass, his expression grave. "Ada Wyndham's sister treats her abominably. Philippa Hartley is one of those women who measures her own success by diminishing others. She never misses an opportunity to remind Ada of her unmarried state, and she's taught her daughters to do the same. Ada endures it with remarkable patience, but I've seen her face when those girls mock her. It's not pleasant to witness." Benjamin's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "And society permits this. Society finds it mildly amusing," Thomas said bluntly. "Ada is a safe target. No husband to defend her, no particular social power of her own. She's become a sort of invisible woman, present but not seen, which is why your sudden interest will cause such a stir. People will assume you're either engaging in some sort of wager or simply amusing yourself at her expense." "Then people are fools," Benjamin said flatly. "Lady Ada is intelligent, thoughtful, and possessed of genuine kindness, qualities I have found remarkably absent in most of the celebrated beauties currently gracing London's ballrooms. If society cannot recognize her worth, that speaks poorly of society, not of her. Thomas smiled slightly. You're going to create quite the scandal, you know. Good, Benjamin said. It's been too long since society had something genuinely interesting to discuss, beyond who wore what dress to which event. What's your next move? Thomas asked, now seeming more intrigued than concerned. Benjamin pulled a piece of writing paper toward him and selected a pen. I'm going to call upon the Earl of Wyndham this afternoon. Properly, formally, as tradition demands. And then I'm going to request permission to pay my addresses to his daughter. Brilliant strategy, Thomas said dryly. Except for one small detail. You'll send the poor woman running in terror. She'll assume you're mocking her. Benjamin paused, pen hovering over paper. Thomas had a point. Ada's words from the previous night echoed in his mind. Society has a way of making such matters painfully clear. She expected nothing from him. Worse, she would interpret any attention as either cruelty or delusion. Then I'll need to demonstrate my sincerity, Benjamin said slowly. I'll need to show her, gradually and carefully, that my interest is genuine, that I see her, truly see her, and value what I see. How romantic, Thomas murmured. Also potentially disastrous, but I admire your conviction. He stood, collecting his hat. Since you're determined to pursue this course, I'll offer what assistance I can. The Hartleys are hosting a small gathering tomorrow evening, cards and conversation. Ada will certainly be there, serving as unpaid chaperone to her nieces. I can ensure you receive an invitation. Do it, Benjamin said immediately. And Thomas, thank you for your honesty and your help. Don't thank me yet, Thomas replied. Wait until we see whether you've started a romance or a catastrophe. After Thomas departed, Benjamin sat for a long time, staring at the blank paper before him. Then, with decisive strokes, he began to write. Not a formal request for an audience with the Earl, not yet, but rather a letter that would begin the careful work of showing Ada Wyndham that she had been seen. Ada sat in the morning room of her sister's townhouse, her embroidery forgotten in her lap, as she stared out the window at the bustling street below. She had barely slept the previous night, her mind replaying her encounter with the Duke of Thornbury in endless, excruciating detail. What had she been thinking, speaking so freely with him? She had revealed far too much. Her affinity for wounded creatures, her philosophical observations about people and their masks, her own resigned acceptance of her place in the world. He must have thought her either pathetic or absurd. Yet there had been something in his eyes, in the way he looked at her, that had felt different from any other interaction she'd had with gentlemen over the years. He had seemed genuinely interested in what she said, genuinely moved by her care for the sparrow. For those few minutes in the conservatory and then in the corridor, she had felt seen. Ada, there you are, hiding away as usual. Philippa swept into the room, immaculate in a morning dress of amber silk. I trust you've recovered from your disappearance last night? Lady Hartwell mentioned you were absent for quite some time. Really, Ada, it's embarrassing enough that I must bring you to these gatherings. Must you also make it obvious how little you belong there? I apologize, Philippa, Ada said softly, setting aside her embroidery. I needed some air. Air, Philippa repeated scornfully. While Rebecca and Caroline were making excellent impressions on several eligible gentlemen, you were off somewhere making yourself even more forgettable than usual. She settled into the chair opposite Ada, arranging her skirts with practiced precision. Though I did hear one interesting piece of gossip. Apparently the Duke of Thornbury was also absent from the gathering for a period. You didn't encounter him during your wanderings, did you? Ada felt heat rise in her cheeks and prayed it wasn't visible. I may have seen his grace briefly. Philippa's eyes sharpened with interest. Briefly. What does that mean, precisely? It means we exchanged a few words of courtesy, nothing more, Ada said, willing her voice to remain steady. He was also seeking some respite from the gathering. How very cozy, Philippa said, her tone dripping with suspicion. Tell me, Ada, you're not harboring any foolish notions about the Duke, are you? Because I assure you, a man of his consequence would never seriously consider a woman of your circumstances. If he paid you any attention at all, it was likely out of pity or simple politeness. I harbor no notions whatsoever, Ada said, though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. The Duke of Thornbury is far above my sphere, as you so frequently remind me. I have no expectations of anything beyond what my life already contains. Good, Philippa said, mollified. It would be mortifying if you developed some sort of infatuation that everyone could see. You've been enough of an embarrassment to the family without adding delusions of grandeur to your list of failings. Rebecca and Caroline chose that moment to enter the room, fresh from their morning ride in Hyde Park. They were flushed with exercise and high spirits, chattering about the various gentlemen who had stopped to speak with them. "Mama, you'll never believe it," Rebecca gushed. "Lord Whitmore asked permission to call upon me this week. Caroline and I both think he's quite handsome despite his age." "Excellent," Philippa said, her earlier irritation with Ada apparently forgotten in the glow of her daughter's success. "You must wear your new blue dress when he calls. It does wonderful things for your complexion." "Not like Aunt Ada's grey dress last night," Caroline said with a giggle. "Aunt, you looked positively ancient in that colour. Though I suppose when one has already been on the shelf for 12 years, fashion becomes rather beside the point." "Caroline, that's unkind," Rebecca said, though her eyes danced with amusement. "Aunt Ada cannot help her circumstances. Though truly, Aunt, you might make more of an effort. Even at your age, there must be some widower or elderly gentleman who might be persuaded to overlook your years." Ada forced herself to smile, to nod, to accept their casual cruelties as she had learned to do over the years. This was her role, the cautionary tale, the example of failure, the woman who existed to make others feel superior by comparison. "If you'll excuse me," she said, rising from her chair, "I believe I'll take a turn in the garden. The morning is quite fine." "Run along," Philippa said dismissively, already absorbed in planning Rebecca's strategy for Lord Whitmore's visit. Ada escaped to the small walled garden behind the townhouse, breathing in the cool March air like a drowning woman breaking the surface. She sank onto a stone bench beneath a bare-branched oak tree, pressing her hands to her face. "Stop thinking about him," she told herself fiercely. "Stop replaying his words, his expression, the way he looked at you as if you were someone worth seeing. It was one conversation, one brief interlude, and it meant nothing. Philippa is right. He was being polite, or perhaps he found you amusing in your patheticity. Either way, you will never see him again beyond glimpses at social gatherings, and that is precisely as it should be." "Lady Ada!" The voice made her start violently. She looked up to find a footman standing at the garden entrance, holding a silver salver. "Yes?" "A letter has just been delivered for you, my lady. The messenger said it required immediate delivery." Ada took the letter with trembling hands, her heart suddenly racing. The paper was of excellent quality, sealed with wax that bore an impression she didn't immediately recognize. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet. The handwriting was strong and elegant, the words brief but extraordinary. "Lady Ada, I wanted to inform you that I stopped by Lady Hartwell's residence this morning to inquire about the sparrow. I am pleased to report that it has recovered sufficiently to be released. The housekeeper said it flew off toward the trees in Berkeley Square, showing no sign of its previous injury. I thought you would wish to know that your kindness bore fruit, and that a small creature flies free today because you took the time to care." Your servant, Thornbury Ada, read the letter 3 times, then a 4th, her eyes blurring with tears she refused to shed. He had gone to check on the bird. He had taken the time to inquire about its welfare and to send her word of its recovery. It was such a small thing, and yet it was everything. A gesture that said he had thought about her, remembered their conversation, understood what that small creature had meant to her. She pressed the letter to her chest, closing her eyes against the dangerous hope that suddenly bloomed in her heart like the first flower of spring. "No," she told herself desperately. "Don't do this. Don't allow yourself to believe that one kind letter means anything more than simple courtesy. Don't fall into the trap of hoping for something that can never be." But even as she lectured herself, she carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket, where it would remain close to her heart for the rest of the day. Benjamin's invitation to the Hartleys' gathering arrived by messenger that afternoon, along with a note from Thomas wishing him luck. He spent the intervening hours alternating between anticipation and strategy, determined to approach Ada carefully, to demonstrate through actions rather than words that his interest was both genuine and serious. The challenge, as he saw it, was twofold. First, to convince Ada herself that he saw her worth. Second, to signal to society that he would not tolerate any mockery or dismissal of her. The first would require patience and persistence. The second would require a certain amount of calculated audacity. Benjamin arrived at the Hartley residence precisely on time, neither unfashionably early nor fashionably late. The gathering was indeed small. Perhaps 20 guests assembled in an elegant drawing room for cards, conversation, and light refreshments. He spotted Ada almost immediately, seated in a corner near the windows, conversing with an elderly woman he recognized as Lady Thornton. She wore a dress of soft rose-colored silk that brought warmth to her complexion and made her grey eyes appear almost luminous. Her hair was arranged simply but attractively, a few soft curls framing her face. She looked lovely, not in the bold, attention-grabbing way of women like her sister Philippa, but in a quiet, understated manner that Benjamin found infinitely more appealing. As if sensing his gaze, Ada looked up. Their eyes met across the room, and he saw recognition, surprise, and something else flash across her face. Was it hope or fear? Perhaps both. He moved toward her with deliberate purpose, ignoring several attempts by other guests to engage him in conversation. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. He had a far more important objective. "Lady Thornton," he said, bowing to the elderly woman first. "How delightful to see you again. I trust you are well." "As well as can be expected at my age, Your Grace," Lady Thornton replied, her sharp eyes moving between Benjamin and Ada with evident curiosity. "I don't believe you've been formally introduced to Lady Ada Wyndham, have you?" "We met briefly at Lady Hartwell's dinner," Benjamin said, then turned his full attention to Ada. "Lady Ada, how very pleased I am to see you again. I hope my letter found you well this morning." He had deliberately mentioned the letter in Lady Thornton's hearing, knowing that the elderly woman's hearing was excellent and her tongue legendary for spreading news throughout society. If he was going to make his interest clear, he might as well begin with witnesses. Ada's cheeks flushed becomingly. "It did, Your Grace. That was very thoughtful of you to inquire about our small patient." "Our patient," Benjamin repeated, smiling. "I like that, though I suspect your care had far more to do with its recovery than my mere inquiry about its welfare." Lady Thornton's eyebrows had climbed toward her hairline. "A patient? How intriguing. Am I to understand you've been attending the sick together?" "A sparrow," Ada explained, clearly flustered. "It had injured itself against a window at Lady Hartwell's residence. His Grace happened upon me as I was examining it." "How remarkably fortuitous," Lady Thornton said, her tone suggesting she found it rather more than fortuitous. "And you've been corresponding about this bird?" "One letter hardly constitutes correspondence," Ada said quickly, shooting Benjamin a look that clearly begged him not to make more of it than it was. But Benjamin had no intention of minimizing anything. "Perhaps not yet," he said smoothly, "but I hope Lady Ada will permit me to continue our acquaintance. I found our conversation at Lady Hartwell's dinner quite the most interesting one I've had since returning to London. Lady Ada has a remarkable perspective on the natural world and on life in general." "Does she indeed?" Lady Thornton murmured, now looking at Ada with undisguised fascination. "How very interesting." Ada appeared to wish the floor would swallow her whole. "Your Grace is too kind. I fear he attributes more significance to a very ordinary conversation than it deserves." "On the contrary," Benjamin said, holding her gaze, "I never attribute significance where none exists, and I am rarely mistaken in my judgments of character." Before Ada could respond, or flee, which seemed to be her inclination, Philippa Hartley appeared at Benjamin's elbow, her daughters in tow like ships trailing in a flagship's wake. "Your Grace, how delightful that you could attend our little gathering." Philippa's smile was dazzling and calculating in equal measure. "I see you've been speaking with my sister. How charitable of you to include her in conversation. Ada has so few opportunities for such elevated discourse." The condescension in her tone made Benjamin's jaw tighten, but he kept his expression pleasant. "Indeed, I sought out Lady Ada specifically. I found her company at Lady Hartwell's dinner to be exceptional, and I wished to continue our acquaintance." Philippa's smile faltered slightly. "How unusual. Well, I'm certain Ada appreciates your kindness, though I must steal you away for a moment. I'm eager to introduce you to my daughters. Rebecca and Caroline are both accomplished young ladies. Rebecca plays the pianoforte beautifully, and Caroline has quite the talent for watercolors." "I'm sure they're very talented," Benjamin said, his tone polite but cool. "However, I was hoping Lady Ada might do me the honor of a game of whist. I find myself without a partner." The silence that followed this pronouncement was profound. Philippa stared at him as if he'd suddenly begun speaking in tongues. Rebecca and Caroline exchanged bewildered glances. Even Lady Thornton looked shocked, and Ada looked terrified. "Your Grace," she said softly, urgently. "I am not. That is, I'm certain there are many more suitable partners for a game. My nieces are both." "I don't wish to partner with your nieces," Benjamin interrupted gently. "I wish to partner with you." "Unless you object to my company?" "No." The word came out too quickly, too forcefully, and Ada visibly collected herself. "No, of course not. I would be honored, if you're certain." "Entirely certain." He offered his arm, and after the briefest hesitation, she took it. As they moved toward the card tables, Benjamin was acutely aware of the whispers that erupted in their wake. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Let them realize that the Duke of Thornbury had chosen the invisible woman, the spinster aunt, the one they had all dismissed as beneath notice. They settled at a table with Lord and Lady Morrison, an older couple who greeted them with surprise but good manners. As the cards were dealt, Benjamin positioned himself so that he could speak quietly to Ada. "I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable," he murmured. "That was not my intention." "You've made me the subject of intense speculation," she whispered back, her eyes on her cards rather than his face. "By tomorrow morning, all of London will be discussing why the Duke of Thornbury showed such marked attention to the spinster sister." "Good," Benjamin said simply. "Let them discuss it. Let them realize that I see what they have been blind to." Ada's hands trembled slightly as she arranged her cards. "Your Grace, I don't understand what game you're playing, but I assure you I am not a suitable pawn. Whatever point you wish to make, please make it with someone else." "I'm not playing a game," Benjamin said, his voice intense despite its low volume. "And you are not a pawn. You are a woman I find remarkably interesting, and I wish to know you better. Is that really so difficult to believe?" "Yes," Ada said bluntly, finally meeting his eyes. "It is impossible to believe. I am 32, firmly on the shelf with no particular beauty or accomplishment to recommend me. You are a wealthy duke who could have his pick of any young woman in London. There is no rational explanation for your attention except either mockery or some sort of wager." The pain in her voice, the absolute certainty that she was unworthy of genuine regard, made Benjamin want to track down every person who had ever made her feel this way and make them deeply regret their cruelty. "Then allow me to prove you wrong," he said quietly. "Allow me to demonstrate through consistent and sincere attention that I see you, value you, and wish to court you properly. I understand you have no reason to trust my motives yet, but I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to earn that trust." "Court me?" Ada's voice rose slightly, and she glanced around quickly to ensure no one had overheard. "Your Grace, you cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious about anything in my life." The game proceeded, though Benjamin doubted either he or Ada paid much attention to the cards. Across the table, Lord and Lady Morrison exchanged significant glances, but maintained polite silence. Around the room, however, conversation had taken on a new energy, with frequent glances directed toward their table. Benjamin played his role perfectly, attentive but not overwhelming, conversational but not intrusive, making it clear through every gesture and glance that Lady Ada Wyndham had his complete attention and approval. It was, he reflected, the opening salvo in a campaign that would require all his strategic thinking and considerable determination, because Ada had been trained by years of neglect and mockery to believe herself invisible and unworthy. Convincing her otherwise would be the greatest challenge of his life, but as he watched the play of emotions across her expressive face, confusion, fear, and that tiny, fragile thread of hope she was trying so desperately to suppress, Benjamin knew he would not give up. He would prove to her and to all of London that Ada Wyndham was exactly the woman he wanted, even if it took him the rest of his life to make her believe it. The morning after the Hartleys' card party, all of London society, or at least that portion of it that mattered, was abuzz with one topic: the Duke of Thornbury's inexplicable interest in Lady Ada Wyndham. Ada learned of her newfound notoriety when Philippa stormed into her small bedchamber at an ungodly hour, waving a letter in her hand like a battle standard. Explain this, Philippa demanded, thrusting the letter at Ada, who was still in her nightdress and wrapper, having not yet summoned her maid. Lady Pemberton writes that you've somehow ensnared the Duke of Thornbury's attention through some sort of manipulation. What have you done? Ada took the letter with trembling hands, scanning its contents. Lady Pemberton's spidery handwriting detailed, with evident relish, the previous evening's events. The Duke's pointed attention to Ada, his request to partner with her at cards, his refusal to engage with Rebecca and Caroline in favor of remaining by Ada's side throughout the evening. I have done nothing, Ada said quietly, setting the letter aside. The Duke chose to be courteous to me. That is all. Courtesy? Philippa's voice rose to a pitch that suggested incipient hysteria. Dukes are not courteous to spinsters unless they're mocking them. What did you do? What did you say to him at Lady Hartwell's dinner? I spoke with him briefly about an injured bird, Ada said, knowing how absurd it sounded, even as the words left her mouth. Nothing more. A bird, Philippa repeated flatly. You expect me to believe that the Duke of Thornbury, one of the most eligible men in England, has developed an interest in you because you discussed a bird? I don't expect you to believe anything, Ada said, feeling a spark of rebellion kindle in her chest. I didn't ask for his attention, nor did I encourage it. If you find it impossible to believe that a man might find me interesting, that says far more about your opinion of me than about the Duke's motives. Philippa's eyes narrowed dangerously. Don't you dare take that tone with me. You have been a burden on this family for 12 years, Ada. A constant reminder of failure, an embarrassment at every gathering. And now, just when Rebecca and Caroline are at the most crucial point in their social debuts, you've managed to make yourself the subject of ridicule and speculation. Do you have any idea how this reflects on them? I imagine it reflects quite well, Ada said, surprised by her own boldness. After all, if the Duke of Thornbury found their aunt worthy of his attention, surely that elevates rather than diminishes their consequence. The logic of this statement clearly caught Philippa off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. That's not... Oh, for heaven's sake! She whirled toward the door, then spun back. Oh, you will cease this immediately. Whatever game you think you're playing with the Duke, end it. I will not have you disrupting Rebecca and Caroline's season with your foolish delusions. After Philippa departed in a flurry of silk and outrage, Ada sank onto her bed, her hands shaking. She had never spoken to her sister that way before, had never dared to contradict her, to suggest that Philippa's certainty might be misplaced. The truth was, Ada didn't know what to think. The Duke of Thornbury's behavior defied all logic, all social convention. Men like him did not court women like her. It simply didn't happen, and yet he had been so earnest, so sincere in his assertion that he wished to know her better. A soft knock at her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Her maid Jenny entered with a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but this just arrived for you. The delivery boy said it was urgent." Ada took the parcel with a sense of inevitability. She already knew who it must be from. With trembling fingers, she unwrapped it to reveal a small leather-bound book and another letter. The book was a beautifully illustrated volume about British birds, not a common guide, but rather an expensive edition with hand-colored plates depicting various species in exquisite detail. The letter was brief. "Lady Ada, I came across this volume in a bookshop on Bond Street and immediately thought of you. I hope you will accept it as a token of my esteem and as evidence of my serious intentions. If you are agreeable, I would very much like to call upon you tomorrow afternoon. I have already written to your father requesting permission to pay my addresses. I trust you will not think me too presumptuous. I remain, as always, your devoted servant, Thornbury." Ada read the letter 3 times, then clutched it to her chest, her heart racing. He had written to her father. He intended to call upon her formally. This was not a fleeting whim or a moment's entertainment. He was following the proper protocols for a serious courtship. It was impossible. It was terrifying. It was everything she had long since ceased allowing herself to hope for, and it was going to destroy her when it inevitably ended. Benjamin spent the morning preparing for what he knew would be a delicate interview with the Earl of Wyndham. He had sent his letter the previous evening, formally requesting permission to call upon Lady Ada with the intent of courtship, and had received a somewhat bewildered but affirmative response that morning. Now, as his carriage drew up before the Wyndham townhouse in Cavendish Square, Benjamin reviewed his strategy. He would be honest about his intentions, firm in his regard for Ada, and absolutely intractable in the face of any suggestion that his interest was inappropriate or inexplicable. The Earl received him in a study lined with books and smelling of tobacco and old leather. Reginald Wyndham was in his early 60s, distinguished in appearance with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that currently regarded Benjamin with considerable confusion. "Your Grace," the Earl said, gesturing to a chair, "I confess your letter quite astonished me. I've read it 3 times and still cannot quite credit its contents." "You wish to court my daughter Ada?" "I do, my lord," Benjamin said without hesitation. "I find her to be a woman of exceptional character, intelligence and kindness. I believe we would suit each other admirably." "But she's 32, the Earl said, as if Benjamin might not be aware of this fact. "She's been out of society's consideration for more than a decade." "Your Grace, you could have your pick of any young woman in London. Women who are beautiful, accomplished, and at the proper age for marriage. Why on earth would you fix your interest on Ada?" "Because," Benjamin said carefully, "I have met beautiful, accomplished women at the proper age for marriage, and I found them uniformly tedious. Lady Ada, on the other hand, I find endlessly fascinating. She thinks deeply, speaks honestly when given the opportunity, and possesses a capacity for compassion that is rare in my experience. Those qualities matter far more to me than youth or conventional beauty." The Earl studied him for a long moment. "You're serious?" "Entirely serious. And you understand that this will cause considerable talk, that society will speculate about your motives." "I understand and do not care," Benjamin said flatly. "Society's opinion matters far less to me than Lady Ada's happiness and my own." The Earl leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know, Ada was always my favorite. She has her mother's gentle spirit and her grandmother's keen mind, but she's had a difficult time of it. My elder daughter Philippa has never been kind to her, and society has been even less so. If you're trifling with her, Your Grace, I'll find a way to make you regret it, Duke or not." "I would expect nothing less," Benjamin said, appreciating the Earl's protectiveness. "And I give you my word as a gentleman that my intentions are entirely honourable. I wish to court Lady Ada properly, with the ultimate aim of offering marriage if she will have me." "If she will have you," the Earl repeated, and now he did smile. "Your Grace, Ada thinks herself invisible and unworthy. Convincing her that a duke wants to marry her will be no easy task. She'll assume you're either mad or mocking her." "Then I'll have to be very persuasive," Benjamin said. "With your permission, of course." The Earl rose and extended his hand. "You have my permission and my blessing. Though I warn you, Philippa will be apoplectic. She spent years ensuring that Ada knows her place, and that place is firmly beneath Philippa's own consequence. You'll be upsetting a carefully constructed hierarchy." "Good," Benjamin said, shaking the Earl's hand firmly. "It's about time someone did." Ada spent the afternoon in a state of agitated anticipation. Her father had summoned her to his study after the Duke of Thornbury's departure, and informed her, with evident pleasure, that she had been granted permission to receive the Duke's formal calls. "He's a good man," the Earl had said, patting her hand in a rare gesture of paternal affection. "Serious, intelligent, and apparently quite taken with you. Don't let your sister's poisonous words convince you otherwise." Now Ada sat in the drawing-room, ostensibly working on her embroidery, but in reality stabbing the fabric with her needle in a rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. The Duke was expected at 3 o'clock. It was now 2:30. Philippa had taken Rebecca and Caroline out for a fitting with the modiste, a strategic absence that Ada suspected was designed to spare them from witnessing what Philippa clearly believed would be a humiliating farce. Before departing, Philippa had cornered Ada in the hallway. "Whatever fantasy you've concocted about the Duke's intentions, put it out of your mind," Philippa had said coldly. "Men of his station do not marry women like you. He's amusing himself at your expense, and when he tires of the joke, you'll be left even more pitiable than before. Mark my words." Ada had not responded, but the words had burrowed into her mind like thorns, impossible to remove. What if Philippa was right? What if this was all some elaborate jest, a story the Duke would tell his friends over brandy? "You'll never believe the spinster who thought I was serious." The clock struck 3, and Ada's needle slipped, pricking her finger. She was staring at the small bead of blood when the butler announced, "The Duke of Thornbury, my lady." Ada rose quickly, perhaps too quickly, and nearly knocked over her embroidery basket. She caught it at the last moment, aware that she looked flustered and awkward, exactly the sort of nervous spinster that Philippa had always said she was. Then the Duke entered the room, and everything else faded away. He was impeccably dressed in a dark blue coat that emphasized his broad shoulders, his black hair carefully styled, his brown eyes warm as they found hers across the room. He carried a small bouquet of spring flowers, nothing extravagant, just a simple arrangement of daffodils and primroses. "Lady Ada," he said, bowing with perfect propriety, "thank you for receiving me. I hope I'm not intruding upon your afternoon." "Not at all, Your Grace," Ada managed, curtsying. "Please, won't you sit?" They arranged themselves on opposite sofas, the proprieties observed, though Ada was acutely aware that they were quite alone. Her father had deliberately refrained from providing a chaperone, another small sign of his approval that would have scandalized Philippa. "These are for you," the Duke said, offering the flowers. "I remembered that in the conservatory you mentioned finding beauty in simple, overlooked things. Daffodils are often dismissed as common, but I've always found them remarkably cheerful." Ada accepted the bouquet with trembling hands, burying her face in the blooms to hide her expression. He remembered. He had listened to her random comments about beauty and nature, and he had remembered. "They're lovely," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." "Did you receive the book I sent?" he asked, settling back into his seat with an ease that Ada envied. He seemed completely comfortable, as if calling upon spinster aunts was something he did regularly. "I did. It's beautiful. Far too expensive a gift for such a casual acquaintance." "Ah, but we're not casual acquaintances," the Duke said gently. "At least, I hope we're not. I meant what I said in my letter, Lady Ada. I wish to court you properly. I wish to know everything about you, your thoughts, your interests, your dreams. I wish to earn the privilege of your trust and eventually your affection." Ada set the flowers aside carefully, needing both hands to clasp together in her lap to stop their trembling. "Your Grace, I must speak plainly. I don't understand why you're doing this. I'm not young, not beautiful, not accomplished in any remarkable way. I have been invisible to society for more than a decade. Why would you, of all men, show me this attention?" "Because you are real," the Duke said simply. "Every other woman I've met in London society performs. They say what they think I want to hear. They behave as they believe I expect them to behave. They present carefully constructed versions of themselves designed to attract a wealthy husband. But you? In the conservatory, when you thought no one was watching, you were completely yourself, gentle, thoughtful, unguarded. That honesty is rarer and more valuable than any conventional beauty or accomplishment." "You saw me at my most foolish," Ada protested, "kneeling on the ground, talking to a bird." "I saw you at your most beautiful," the Duke interrupted firmly, "and I saw a woman I wanted to know. A woman I still want to know." Ada closed her eyes briefly, fighting against the hope that threatened to bloom in her chest. "Everyone will say you're mad. My own sister believes you're mocking me." "Your sister," the Duke said, and there was steel in his voice now, "has treated you abominably for years. Her opinion is worth precisely nothing to me. And as for society, let them talk. I've never lived my life according to society's expectations, and I don't intend to start now." "But why?" Ada asked desperately. "Why me? You could have anyone." "Because I don't want anyone," the Duke said, leaning forward, his brown eyes intense. "I want you, Ada. I want the woman who cares for wounded sparrows. I want the woman who thinks deeply about life and people. I want the woman who speaks honestly about barriers that appear invisible until you strike against them. I want you." The use of her given name, without the formal title, should have been improper. Instead, it felt intimate, personal, as if he was stripping away the walls she had built around herself over years of self-protection. "I'm frightened," she whispered. "I'm frightened that this is a dream, and I'll wake up to discover it was all my imagination. I'm frightened that you'll realize your mistake and disappear, leaving me even more alone than I was before. I'm frightened of hoping for something that seems impossible." The Duke stood and crossed to her sofa, sitting beside her, closer than propriety strictly allowed, but not close enough to be truly scandalous. He took one of her clasped hands in his touch warm and solid and real. "Then let me prove it to you," he said softly. "Let me call upon you every day. Let me take you driving in the park. Let me escort you to gatherings where all of society can see that I choose you, value you, desire your company above all others. Let me demonstrate through consistent and devoted attention that this is no dream, no mistake, no temporary fancy. Let me court you properly, Ada, and let me show you that you deserve to be loved." A single tear escaped down Ada's cheek, and the Duke reached up to wipe it away with his thumb, the gesture so tender that it broke something loose in her chest. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to be courted. I don't know how to believe that I'm worthy of this attention." "Then we'll learn together," the Duke said, smiling. "I'll teach you how to accept compliments without dismissing them. You'll teach me about birds and all the other things you observe in the world. We'll attend dreadfully boring social functions and make them bearable by sharing secret observations. We'll scandalize your sister and delight your father. And gradually, day by day, I'll prove to you that this is real." Ada looked into his eyes, those warm brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul, and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll allow you to court me, but your Grace—" "Benjamin," he corrected gently. "When we're alone, please call me Benjamin." "Benjamin," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "If you discover that I'm not what you imagined, if you realize you've made a mistake, please tell me honestly. Don't let this continue out of pity or obligation. I couldn't bear that." "I won't," he promised. "But Ada, I won't need to tell you I've made a mistake, because I haven't. You're exactly what I've been searching for, even when I didn't realize I was searching. Now tell me, what other books do you enjoy? What do you do with your days? What makes you happy?" And so they talked for 2 hours that felt like minutes, about books and birds and music and art. Benjamin asked questions and listened to her answers with genuine interest. Ada found herself relaxing, speaking more freely than she had in years, discovering that conversation with someone who truly listened was one of life's unexpected pleasures. When Benjamin finally took his leave, promising to call again the next day, Ada stood at the window and watched his carriage depart. She touched her fingers to her lips, hardly daring to believe what was happening. The Duke of Thornbury, Benjamin, wanted to court her. Her. Ada Wyndham, the invisible woman, the spinster aunt, the cautionary tale. For the first time in 12 years, Ada allowed herself to hope. Over the following weeks, Benjamin pursued his courtship with unwavering dedication. He called upon Ada every afternoon that propriety allowed, took her driving in Hyde Park, at the fashionable hour when all of society could observe them, and insisted on her company at every social gathering he attended. The reaction was precisely what he had anticipated: shock, speculation, and no small amount of malicious gossip. But Benjamin faced it all with serene indifference, making it abundantly clear through word and deed that Lady Ada Wyndham had his complete attention and approval. The transformation in Ada was gradual, but unmistakable. The hunched shoulders began to straighten, the downcast eyes began to lift, the apologetic demeanor began to give way to something more confident, more assured. She started wearing brighter colors, rose and azure and soft gold, that brought out the gray of her eyes and the honey tones in her hair. She smiled more readily, laughed more freely, and occasionally even made witty observations that made Benjamin grin with delight. She was, he thought, like a flower that had been kept in shadow, finally brought into the light. And watching her bloom was the greatest privilege of his life. Not everyone was pleased with this development. Philippa grew increasingly agitated as the courtship progressed, unable to reconcile her long-held beliefs about Ada's unworthiness with the evidence before her eyes. A wealthy, titled duke was genuinely, seriously courting her younger sister. "It won't last," she said repeatedly to anyone who would listen. "He'll tire of his little experiment soon enough. Men like the Duke of Thornbury don't marry women like Ada. It's simply not done." But weeks turned into a month, and Benjamin showed no signs of waning interest. If anything, he seemed more devoted with each passing day. The breaking point came at Lady Ashford's ball, one of the season's most glittering events. Benjamin had claimed Ada's hand for the first dance of the evening, an unmistakable declaration that she was his chosen partner, the woman he honored above all others. As they took their positions for the waltz, Ada looked up at him with those grey eyes that he had come to know so well, now shining with something that looked remarkably like happiness. "Are you certain about this?" she asked softly, even now unable to fully trust in her own worth. "Everyone is staring." "Let them stare," Benjamin said, pulling her into the dance with perfect propriety but unmistakable possessiveness. "Let them see that the Duke of Thornbury has chosen the most remarkable woman in London." They waltzed, and for those few minutes the rest of the world fell away. There was only the music, the movement, and the feeling of Ada in his arms, right where she belonged. Watching from the edge of the ballroom, Philippa stood rigid with fury, while Rebecca and Caroline whispered behind their fans, their expressions ranging from confusion to envy. Thomas Ashford, standing beside the Earl of Wyndham, grinned openly. "Your daughter appears to be quite thoroughly courted," Thomas observed to the Earl. "Indeed she does," the Earl said with obvious satisfaction. "Quite thoroughly. I expect an engagement announcement within the month." And as Benjamin led Ada through the final turns of the waltz, gazing down at her with such transparent adoration that even the most cynical observers had to admit it looked remarkably like love, he made a decision. It was time to stop courting and start proposing. Benjamin chose the location for his proposal with deliberate care, Lady Hartwell's conservatory, where it had all begun 6 weeks earlier. He had secured Lady Hartwell's permission and cooperation, ensuring they would have complete privacy during what he hoped would be the most important conversation of his life. He called upon Ada that afternoon, as had become his custom, but instead of suggesting a drive in the park, he proposed a walk. "Lady Hartwell has kindly invited us to view her conservatory's new spring plantings," he said, watching Ada's face carefully. "She suggested that your expertise on birds might help her identify which species are nesting near her property." Ada's eyes lit up, that particular expression that Benjamin had come to treasure, the one that appeared when she forgot to guard herself and simply felt joy. "I would love that," she said immediately, then caught herself. "That is, if it wouldn't be too tedious for you." "Nothing involving your company could ever be tedious," Benjamin said, and was rewarded with the faint blush that still appeared whenever he paid her direct compliments. They arrived at Lady Hartwell's residence to find the lady herself conveniently called away on urgent business, leaving her conservatory at their disposal. Benjamin led Ada through the glass doors into the space that had witnessed the beginning of everything. "Oh," Ada breathed, looking around at the profusion of spring flowers that had been carefully arranged. "It's beautiful." "It is," Benjamin agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the flowers. "Ada, do you remember the first time we met? Right here, 6 weeks ago?" "Of course," she said, turning to face him. "I was kneeling on the floor, caring for that injured sparrow. You must have thought me quite odd." "I thought you remarkable," Benjamin corrected. "I stood in the doorway and watched you for 12 seconds before you noticed me, and in those 12 seconds everything changed." Ada tilted her head, curious. "Changed? How?" Benjamin took her hands in his, feeling their familiar warmth, their slight tremor that suggested she was not as calm as she appeared. "In those 12 seconds I saw you, truly saw you for the first time, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was looking at someone extraordinary, someone real and genuine and capable of deep feeling, someone I wanted to know for the rest of my life." "Benjamin," she whispered, and he could see tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "For 12 years, society told you that you were invisible, unworthy, a failure because you didn't marry young. For 12 years you believed those lies. But Ada, you were never invisible. You were simply waiting for someone who had the wisdom to see you as you truly are." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Ada's breath caught, her free hand coming up to press against her heart. "Lady Ada Wyndham," Benjamin said, opening the box to reveal a ring, a simple band of gold set with a perfect grey stone that matched her eyes, flanked by small diamonds. "You have filled my life with meaning and joy. You have taught me that real beauty lies not in youth or conventional perfection, but in depth of character and capacity for love. You are intelligent, compassionate, thoughtful, and infinitely precious to me. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" The tears spilled over now, running down Ada's cheeks as she stared at him. at the ring, then back at him. "You're serious," she said wonderingly. "You're really serious. This isn't a dream." "Not a dream," Benjamin assured her, his own eyes burning with emotion. "This is real, Ada. I am real. My love for you is real. And I'm asking you, here in the place where it all began, to marry me, to let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that you were never invisible. You were just waiting for someone worthy of seeing you." "Yes," Ada said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Benjamin. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes." Benjamin slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. Not tears of sadness now, but tears of joy and relief and disbelief that something so wonderful could be real. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I loved you after 12 seconds, and I'll love you for the rest of my life." "I love you too," Ada whispered back, tilting her face up to his. "I was so frightened to hope, so certain this would end badly. But you never wavered. You never doubted. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. And now," Benjamin said, smiling down at her, "all of London will see you as the Duchess of Thornbury. Let them try to ignore you then." Ada laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy that made Benjamin's heart soar. "My sister will be apoplectic. I'm counting on it," Benjamin said, and kissed her, a kiss that was tender and passionate and full of promise for their future together. The announcement of the engagement between Benjamin Grey, Duke of Thornbury, and Lady Ada Wyndham appeared in the Morning Post the following day. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Lady Philippa Hartley received the news while at breakfast with her family. She read the announcement 3 times, her face growing progressively more purple before hurling the newspaper across the room. "It's impossible," she shrieked. "Ada, the Duke of Thornbury is marrying Ada. It cannot be true." "It cannot." Lord Edmund, accustomed to his wife's theatrics but somewhat unnerved by this particular display, retrieved the newspaper and read the announcement himself. "It appears to be quite true, my dear. The bans are to be read beginning this Sunday. They'll marry within the month." "This is your fault," Philippa accused, rounding on Rebecca and Caroline. "Both of you. You had opportunities to attract his attention, and you squandered them. Instead, your pathetic spinster aunt has somehow ensnared one of the most eligible men in England." "Mama, that's hardly fair," Rebecca protested. "The Duke never showed the slightest interest in either of us. He was obsessed with Aunt Ada from the moment he met her." "Obsessed," Philippa repeated bitterly, "with Ada, mousy, invisible Ada, who has been nothing but a burden on this family for years, and now she'll be a duchess, while my beautiful daughters remain unmarried. The injustice is insupportable." At the Wyndham residence, the reaction could not have been more different. The Earl of Wyndham, upon reading the announcement, had immediately ordered champagne and invited his closest friends to celebrate. Ada, still unable to quite believe what was happening, found herself embraced by her father with unusual emotion. "You deserve this happiness," he told her firmly. "You have been patient and kind in the face of cruelty, and now you are being rewarded with a man who sees your true worth. I am so very proud of you, my dear." Visitors began arriving almost immediately, some genuinely happy for Ada, others clearly driven by curiosity about how the spinster aunt had captured a duke. Lady Thornton was among the first, her sharp eyes taking in Ada's obvious joy. "Well," the elderly woman said, settling into a chair with evident satisfaction, "I suspected something of the sort when I saw the Duke seek you out at the Hartleys' gathering. He looked at you the way my late husband used to look at me, as if you were the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve this, Lady Ada. You've been overlooked far too long." The most difficult encounter came 3 days after the announcement, when Philippa appeared at the Wyndham residence, demanding to see Ada. They met in the drawing room, with the door carefully left ajar for propriety. Though given Ada's engaged status, the restrictions had begun to ease. Philippa looked simultaneously furious and calculating, a dangerous combination that Ada recognized from years of painful experience. "I suppose you're quite pleased with yourself," Philippa began without preamble. "You've somehow convinced the Duke to offer for you, and now you'll be elevated above your station while my daughters remain unattached." "I did not set out to convince anyone of anything," Ada said quietly, though she felt a new strength flowing through her now, supported by Benjamin's love and her father's approval. "The Duke chose to court me of his own volition." "Chose," Philippa scoffed. You must have done something to trap him. Men like the Duke of Thornbury do not fall in love with women like you through any natural course of events." Ada stood, drawing herself up to her full height, and for the first time in her life, she looked her sister directly in the eyes without flinching. "You're wrong, Philippa. Men like Benjamin, good men, honest men, men of depth and character, do fall in love with women like me. Women who think and feel deeply. Women who care about more than appearance and status. Women who are real." "Real?" Philippa's voice dripped with contempt. "You're a spinster who got lucky. Don't pretend this is some great love story." "But it is," Ada said, and she smiled. A genuine, radiant smile that made Philippa take an involuntary step backward. "Benjamin loves me. Not despite who I am, but because of who I am. He saw me when everyone else looked through me. He valued me when you insisted I had no value. And he chose me, not your daughters, not any of the young beauties society offered him, but me. That is love, Philippa, and it's something you've never understood. How dare you—" "I dare because I'm about to become the Duchess of Thornbury," Ada interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "And as such I will no longer tolerate your cruelty or your daughter's mockery. You have spent 12 years making me feel small and worthless. That ends now. I will invite you to my wedding because you are my sister, but I will not endure your attempts to diminish my happiness. Is that understood?" Philippa stared at her, clearly stunned by this transformation. The meek, apologetic Ada she had bullied for years was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and refused to apologize for it. "You've changed," Philippa said finally, her voice almost wondering. "No," Ada corrected gently. "I'm finally becoming who I was always meant to be. Benjamin helped me see myself clearly. That's what love does. It doesn't change you, it reveals you." After Philippa departed, subdued in a way Ada had never witnessed before, Ada stood by the window looking out at the spring afternoon. In 2 weeks, she would marry Benjamin. In 2 weeks, she would become a duchess. But more importantly, she would begin her life with a man who had seen past society's judgments to the woman beneath. She touched the ring on her finger, the grey stone that matched her eyes, and smiled. 12 years of being invisible, 12 seconds to be seen, and now, a lifetime of being loved. The wedding took place on a brilliant April morning at St. George's Church in Hanover Square. Despite the short engagement period, Benjamin had insisted on a proper ceremony with all of society in attendance. He wanted everyone to witness his joy, his pride in his bride, his absolute conviction that Lady Ada Wyndham was exactly who he wanted. Ada stood in the small room adjacent to the church, looking at her reflection in the full-length mirror with a sense of unreality. The woman staring back at her was almost unrecognizable. She wore a gown of ivory silk and delicate lace, her hair arranged in an elegant style, adorned with orange blossoms, her grey eyes bright with happiness and lingering disbelief. "You look beautiful," her father said from the doorway, and when Ada turned, she saw tears in his eyes. "Your mother would be so proud. I wish she could have lived to see this day." "I wish that too," Ada said softly. Her mother had died when Ada was 16, before her disastrous first season, and Ada often wondered if things might have been different with her mother's gentle guidance and support. "The Duke is a good man," the Earl continued, crossing to take her hands. "He loves you truly. I see it in his eyes every time he looks at you. And Ada, you deserve this. You deserve every moment of happiness ahead. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of music and candlelight and flowers. Ada walked down the aisle on her father's arm, acutely aware of the crowded pews, the whispers, the craning necks. But all of it faded when she saw Benjamin waiting for her at the altar. He looked magnificent in his formal attire, his dark hair gleaming in the light from the tall windows, his brown eyes locked on her with such intensity that she felt it like a physical touch. And when she reached him, when her father placed her hand in Benjamin's, the smile that transformed his face was radiant with joy. "You're beautiful," he whispered, as they knelt for the blessing, words meant only for her. "You're perfect, and in a few minutes, you'll be mine." "I've been yours since the conservatory," Ada whispered back, "since those first 12 seconds." The vows were traditional, spoken in voices that trembled with emotion. Ada promised to love, honor, and cherish, and meant every word with her whole heart. Benjamin promised the same, and when he slipped the wedding band onto her finger beside her engagement ring, His hands were steady and sure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest intoned. "Your Grace, you may kiss your bride." Benjamin cupped Ada's face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had begun to fall, and kissed her tenderly. It was not a passionate kiss. They were in church, after all, but it was full of promise and devotion and absolute certainty. They were married. Ada was now the Duchess of Thornbury. The breakfast following the ceremony was held at Thornbury House, which Ada was still becoming accustomed to thinking of as her home. The ballroom had been transformed into a spring garden, with flowers and greenery creating an atmosphere of natural beauty. Guests filled the space with laughter and conversation, toasting the bride and groom with genuine warmth. Philippa attended with her family, maintaining a stiff smile that never reached her eyes. Rebecca and Caroline were more subdued than Ada had ever seen them, their previous mockery transformed into wary respect. They had learned, perhaps, that dismissing someone as invisible and worthless could be a grave miscalculation. Thomas Ashford, as Benjamin's closest friend, offered the first toast. "To the Duke and Duchess of Thornbury," he said, raising his glass. "May their marriage be filled with all the joy, love, and happiness that their courtship so clearly promised. And may we all remember that the most remarkable treasures are often those that others overlook." There were appreciative murmurs at this not-so-subtle reference to Ada's transformation from overlooked spinster to celebrated duchess. Benjamin, standing beside Ada with her hand firmly clasped in his, smiled with unmistakable satisfaction. Later, after most of the guests had departed and only close friends and family remained, Benjamin led Ada out to the terrace overlooking the gardens. The spring evening was cool but pleasant, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "How do you feel?" Benjamin asked, pulling her close to his side. "Her Grace, the Duchess of Thornbury." "Overwhelmed," Ada admitted. "Grateful, terrified, blissfully happy, all of those things at once." She looked up at him, this man who had changed her life so completely. "Benjamin, did you ever doubt? Did you ever question whether I was worth all of this?" "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Ada, you need to understand something. I didn't elevate you by marrying you. You elevated me by agreeing to be my wife. You brought meaning and genuine feeling into a life that had become empty and tedious. You showed me what real beauty looks like, the kind that exists in compassion and depth of character, rather than superficial perfection. If anything, I am the fortunate one in this marriage. I spent 12 years believing I was invisible," Ada said softly. 12 years thinking I had failed at the one thing society expected of me. And then you looked at me for 12 seconds, and everything changed. 12 seconds to see you," Benjamin said, tilting her face up to his. "And a lifetime to love you. That seems like an excellent bargain to me." He kissed her again, more thoroughly this time, and Ada felt the last of her doubts dissolve. This was real. This was her life now. She was loved, valued, chosen, not despite her age or her past, but because of who she fundamentally was. When they finally drew apart, Ada rested her head against Benjamin's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For not giving up when I tried to push you away. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." "You're welcome," Benjamin said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I should thank you as well, for taking a chance on me, for letting me prove my worth, for agreeing to share your life with mine." They stood together as the sun set. Two people who had found each other against all odds, united by a love that had begun in 12 seconds and would last the rest of their lives. 5 years later, the gardens at Thornbury Hall, Benjamin's country estate in Northumberland, were alive with the sounds of spring. Birds sang in the ancient oaks, bees hummed among the flower beds, and from somewhere nearby came the delighted laughter of children. Ada sat on a blanket spread beneath a massive willow tree, watching her twin daughters, 4-year-old Eleanor and Elizabeth, chase butterflies with the single-minded determination that characterized their every endeavor. They had their father's dark hair and their mother's gray eyes, and they were utterly fearless in their exploration of the world. "Mama, look," Eleanor called, pointing to a robin that had landed nearby. "It's like the story Papa tells about the sparrow." "Very similar," Ada agreed, smiling. The story of the injured sparrow had become a favorite bedtime tale, suitably embellished for young listeners, but fundamentally true. The story of how their father had seen their mother caring for a wounded bird and fallen in love in just 12 seconds. Benjamin emerged from the house carrying their newest addition, 6-month-old Thomas, named for his godfather, Viscount Ashford. The baby gurgled contentedly in his father's arms, his plump cheeks flushed with health. "I believe someone wants his mother," Benjamin said, settling beside Ada on the blanket and carefully transferring the baby into her arms. Thomas immediately began rooting for milk, and Ada laughed. "Subtle as always," she said, shifting so she could nurse him discreetly beneath the privacy of the willow's drooping branches. Benjamin watched his family with evident contentment. The past 5 years had been everything he had hoped for, and more. Ada had blossomed as the Duchess of Thornbury, her natural intelligence and compassion making her beloved among their tenants and servants. She had transformed Thornbury Hall from a cold, formal estate into a warm family home, and she had given him 3 beautiful children who filled his days with joy and purpose. "I received a letter from your father today," Benjamin said, stretching out beside her. "He and Thomas will be arriving next week for their annual visit. He also mentioned that Philippa has finally married off Caroline to a baronet in Yorkshire." "That's good news," Ada said, genuinely pleased. "Caroline deserves happiness. She's grown into a much kinder person over the years." It was true. Both Rebecca and Caroline had undergone significant transformations after Ada's marriage, perhaps shocked into recognizing that their own behavior might need adjustment. Rebecca had married a respectable country squire 2 years prior and seemed content with her rural life. Caroline had taken longer to find a suitable match, but the baronet, by all accounts, was a good man who valued her for herself. As for Philippa, she had never quite recovered from her younger sister's spectacular elevation. The relationship between the sisters was cordial now, but the easy cruelty that had characterized their earlier interactions was gone. Philippa had been forced to confront the reality that her judgments had been profoundly wrong, and that Ada, whom she had dismissed as worthless, had achieved a marriage that eclipsed her own in both affection and consequence. "Eleanor, Elizabeth, come here, please," Ada called to the twins. "It's time for tea." The girls ran over, full of stories about the butterflies they'd seen and the flowers they'd picked. They settled on the blanket, accepting fruit and small cakes from the basket the kitchen had prepared, chattering away in that unself-conscious way of young children. Benjamin looked at his wife, at the contentment in her face, the confidence in her bearing, the absolute certainty that she was loved and valued, and felt profound gratitude for that moment 5 years ago when he had glanced through the glass doors of Lady Hartwell's conservatory. 12 seconds. That's all it had taken to recognize the woman who would become his wife, the mother of his children, his partner in all things. "What are you thinking about?" Ada asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "I'm thinking," Benjamin said, reaching over to take her free hand, "that I am the most fortunate man alive, and that 12 seconds was time very well spent." Ada smiled. That same radiant, unguarded smile that had first captured his heart and squeezed his hand. "Best 12 seconds of my life, too." As the afternoon sun filtered through the willow branches, painting them all in dappled gold, the Thornbury family sat together in perfect contentment. Ada had been invisible for 12 years, seen for 12 seconds, and loved for the rest of her life. And that, she reflected as baby Thomas finished nursing and smiled up at her with milk-drunk satisfaction, was precisely as it should be. The end. Dear listener, if you've reached this point in the story, perhaps you too have known what it feels like to be overlooked, to be dismissed, to be told that your time has passed. Perhaps you've spent years accepting society's verdict that you are invisible, unworthy of notice or love. If so, let Ada's story remind you of an essential truth. Real love doesn't see age or conventional beauty. Real love sees the heart beneath, the capacity for kindness, for deep thought, for genuine feeling. Real love recognizes worth that others overlook. It's never too late. You are never too old, never too far past your supposed prime, never too invisible to be seen by someone who possesses the wisdom to recognize your true value. The world is full of superficial people who judge by appearances and youth, but it is also full of people like Benjamin, people who seek substance over show, depth over shallow beauty, genuine connection over performance. If you are past 30, 40, 50 or beyond, and you've been told, by society, by family, by your own weary heart, that your chance for love has passed, please know, you are not invisible. You are simply waiting for someone who has the wisdom to see you as you truly are. And when that person appears, you won't need 12 years of waiting to be over. Sometimes, all it takes is 12 seconds of genuine recognition to change everything. May you all find your own Benjamin, or may you be someone else's Benjamin, seeing and valuing what others have dismissed. With warmth and hope for all seeking hearts, the Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. Please help us continue telling stories like this one by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing to our channel. Your support truly means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create more heartwarming tales of love, redemption, and unexpected joy. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another unforgettable story. Click and let yourself be surprised by another emotional journey filled with love and hope.